of you are even taking this course because you would want to know how to communicate effectively. So being able to communicate effectively is the most important of all life skills. So why do we say so? Because we communicate in everything that we do. We are judged by the way we write, the way we act, the way we dress, the way we talk, and how we manage our responsibilities. So, for example, if you had to attend an interview, a job interview that is, and then you dress like you're going to a club, what are you communicating to the panel that is interviewing you? So in everything that we do, we communicate something to the other person or to a group of people that we are with. So communication, being able to communicate effectively is very important, and we're here to help you understand what communication is and why having effective communication skills is very, very important. So now in the morning, communication was defined as an act of sending, giving rather, receiving, and sharing information to a group of people or to just one person. So it involves a lot of things. It's not just about talking to a person and maybe the other person just listening. So it's important that you're able to have effective communication skills in order to put across a message to a person so that that person will be able to understand that message and will be able to give you the feedback that you need. So if, for example, you are told one thing and you hear another, do you think communication has taken place then? I don't think so. So when you are told something and you're able to understand what you're told and you're able to give proper feedback, then communication has taken place. So when you share information between two or more individuals with or within a group, then you help to reach a common understanding. So the major aim in communication is to help reach a common understanding. And if you do that, then communication has taken place. So in Latin, it's called communicare. It means to share. So there's an illustration where a couple is having some ice cream, some food, and the woman is telling the man to say, your food smells delicious. So that's the message that she is sending to the man. And in response, the feedback that he gives is to say, thank you. And then he now starts interpreting the message. She wants, does she want to try a bite? So here you can look at the picture and you can interpret it in so many ways. So the woman is the sender of the message and the man is the receiver, and he's able to give feedback to the woman. So what is communication? So communication is the process of sending and receiving messages through verbal and non-verbal means. So you will look at the verbal and non-verbal means later. So why is communication important? If you went through the notes, I'm sure you can answer some of these questions. Zele will be able to take down the answers. And if you have any clarities or any questions based on what you've read, you can still inbox and Zele will take down your questions. So we look at the importance of communication and why it's important to have effective communication skills. So as individuals, we may study any language, but it's important that we're able to read, write, speak, and listen well so that we can communicate with others effectively. So in order to do that, we also need to have communication skills. Now, why should we have communication skills? I mentioned in the morning, it's because you will need to express yourself. You need to express how you feel, okay? For example, you say or you show that you're excited about your success or about a given task. You need to influence, okay? By influencing, I can give an example of maybe when we go to buy something at the market, or usually we try to negotiate with the person that is selling that product to you. If you go and you have maybe less cash and the product is being sold at a higher price, then you try and negotiate so that that person can reduce the price for you in order for you to purchase that product. So in that negotiation, you're trying to influence that someone to do what you want. So it's important to have communication skills in order to influence someone to do something that you want. Then you can also use communication skills to inform, communicating to your employees the time of a meeting. Like we have done here at TCI, we informed you about this free training that we're conducting, and you were able to get that message and you responded. So meaning communication had taken place effectively. Then it's important because it's also a basis of decision making. So proper communication that highlights information to the manager can be useful in decision making. Imagine if you got the wrong information and you needed to make a decision based on that information that you're receiving. So if there's no proper communication, then even the decision that you make will be a wrong one. So effective communication is very important because it helps us to make decisions effectively. Then it increases cooperation and organizational peace. I'm sure I won't go through everything just for the sake of time. I'll just pick a few things because I know that you went through these notes in the morning. It also boosts morale for the employees. So on this one, maybe I can explain a little bit more why communication, having effective communication skills boosts morale for the employees. So when you are working, for example, you're working for an organization and there's no effective communication. Efficient systems of communications are not there. Management does not communicate to the employees what is going on, and you just work. You just go on working. You don't know what the company is planning. You don't know what you don't have any plans or targets for the company. So it means you will not have that morale to work because you keep on just working. You don't know what you're working for. So communication is important because it will be there to motivate, it will be there to influence and to satisfy the needs of the employees. And in turn, it will boost their morale and it will keep them motivated. So as a people person, a person that interacts with people every day, if you communicate very well, then you can get your message across to us, to others in an effective way. And in turn, it will enable them to have clear and concise instructions. So this will also help them to complete their assigned tasks. So if communication is poor, then messages can get distorted. So you see how important communication is. Then what are communication skills? What are communication skills? So communication skills are the tools that we use to remove the barriers. You need to take note that at every stage of communication, there are barriers. So we'll look at these barriers in the next slide. So now these are tools that are used to remove the barriers that are there to effective communication. So when you are communicating with someone, you need to have the skill to identify the barriers that are there. And once you identify the barriers that are there, then you'll be able to get rid of those barriers and you'll be able to put across that message to the other person, or that other person will be able to receive the message that you're trying to send to them effectively. And in turn, like I mentioned earlier, they will be able to give you the feedback that you need. So these barriers that are there in communication are things like different expectations, cultures, experiences, perspectives, communication styles to mention, but if you will have an in-depth discussion later on the barriers. So communication skills that a person needs in order to communicate effectively, listening, straight talking, non-verbal communication, stress management, and emotional control. So if a person have these skills, for example, let's pick stress management or emotional control. I'm sure we in here we have people who are managing other people, and if you are a boss or you're a manager, and then you are not able to control your emotions, do you think you will be approachable? Do you think people will communicate with you? I don't think so, because if you're not able to control your emotions, you're always angry, you don't give chance to people to talk, you always want to put across your points, you don't want to hear other people's views. I don't think that company can go anywhere, because you will not be able to control your emotions, and you will not be able to communicate with the people that you're managing. Stress management is also very, very important. To manage your stress is very important, because it will help you to communicate effectively with other people. When you're stressed, maybe you have a lot of work to do, you have a pressure at home, you know how it is nowadays, school fees, this one wants what, and then you also have deadlines to meet at work, then you get stressed. So if you can manage that stress, you'll be able to just pour out your anger on people, and you won't be able to communicate effectively. So you need these skills so that you can communicate effectively with others. So the fact that communication is a two-way process, it means that the person on the other side of the barriers might also try to send messages back to you. So what does this mean? So this is a situation where you send a message to a person, or you communicate with an audience, and you expect feedback, because always when you communicate, there's supposed to be feedback. So you send a message to a person, and the person on the other side is also experiencing the barriers that are there. Remember, there are barriers at every stage of communication. So be it with the sender or the receiver. So the receiver will also have barriers. Now, the only way to overcome those barriers is for one to have effective communication skills. So if the other person does not have effective communication skills, what are you supposed to do as the sender of that message, or the one who is expecting feedback from the receiver? Zele, are you there? I think maybe Zele, you can help us answer this question. What can you do in a situation where the person you're communicating with does not have the communication skills?
If I am dealing with somebody who doesn't have communication skills, the first thing that I would think to do is try to understand, their communication style. I think it's important to know, the communication styles that are there, and also to know your own communication style, because once you do that, then you are able to identify which communication skills to use to resolve, that particular barrier. I think that's what I would do if I was in that situation.
Okay, thank you, Zele, for that answer. So,
actually, Martha, before you proceed, there's actually a question. There's a question from Nathan, which says, on communication barriers, can we add noise to barriers? So in my understanding is that noise can be, a distraction or something that will distort the message. So as well as the barriers that are going to be mentioned, can we add noise as a barrier as well?
Well, definitely. Barriers are those things that will deter us from communicating effectively. So anything that will not make your message to be sent effectively to the other person or to the receiver is a barrier. So if noise is preventing you from sending that message effectively to another person, then that is a barrier. It's something that hinders communication to take place effectively. And I hope I have answered your question.
Yes, there's another question here, but maybe I'll wait for you to finish this section and then we can come back to it.
Okay, all right. So just to add on what Zele has said, because communication is a two-way process, so it means even the other person on the other side is experiencing barriers to communication. So if they do not have the communication skills, which we mentioned to say there are communication skills that you need to have in order to overcome barriers: listening, straight talking, nonverbal communication, stress management, and emotional control. So if a person that is receiving your message does not have these effective skills, you who is the sender of that message, if you have those communication skills, you're supposed to help the other person. First of all, you're supposed to identify the barriers that are there. It's very important that you identify the barriers that are there in your communication process. And then when you identify the barriers that are there, then you should be able to use the communication skills that you have in order to overcome those barriers. So if the other person doesn't have the skills, use your skills. If you've noticed that the barrier that is there is stress management, and you have control, you know how to manage stress, you have emotional control, use those skills to help the other person to overcome those barriers. And as a result, you'll be able to communicate effectively, meaning you'll be able, your message will be received by that person, and you get the feedback that you need. Hence, communication would have taken place. So now we go to the actual barriers to communication. I'm sure by now you know what barriers are to communicate, to effective communication. So these barriers, what you have to take note is that these barriers may occur at any stage in the communication process, and this may lead to your message being distorted, and you therefore risk wasting time and money if money is involved. And this can lead to unproductivity if you're running a company. So it's very, very important that you identify the barriers that are there in communication in order for you to have effective communication. So it means overcoming these barriers and conveying a clear and concise message. So now, what are these barriers that we're talking about? So I mentioned a few of them earlier on. So we can look at these ones that have been listed for us here. The first one is communication styles. So communication styles is a topic that my colleague Zele will deal with tomorrow. So you'll be able to understand what communication styles. I'll just explain a bit on them. So these are different ways in which a person communicates. So each one of us in here has a unique way of communicating. So if we are able to identify the different ways that a person has of communicating, then we'll know how to communicate with that person. Okay, so everyone has a different style. So some people are very direct, while others prefer a more indirect approach. Some are more detailed, others depend on generalities and so forth. So this simply means that the way a person communicates will differ with the way another person will communicate. So if we are able to identify how this person communicates, for example, if my way of communication is direct, okay, I don't need details. I just need you to get to the point. I don't need any explanations. I don't need you to take long. I just want you to tell me what it is and what it is that you want. Okay, then that is my direct way of communicating. And if the person that I'm communicating with is one that is detail oriented, maybe they want to explain, they want to make you understand, and you feel like their explanation is boring or it will just take much of your time, then that is their way also of communicating. So meaning, if I do not identify the other person's way of communicating and the other person also doesn't identify, then we'll have a barrier there. We will not communicate effectively. So one person is so entrenched in their way or their own way of communicating, and they will find it difficult to communicate with others who rely on a different style. There's an example there. Zele never explains what she wants me to do. She's never specific. Meaning Zele will just tell you, Martha, I want a glass of water. So I should guess that Zele wants a glass of water, that is maybe cold water or room temperature. So if I know Zele's way of communicating, I will ask Zele to say, oh, would you like it ice cold or room temperature? Then she will tell me room temperature. Then I know to say, okay, Zele wants water that is not ice cold. So we need to take note of these differences in communication styles. Zele will explain more on this tomorrow. Then we have cultural differences. Cultural differences, of course, we all come from different cultures, we have different practices, and that also is a barrier to communication. Because if I don't know your culture, I don't know the way you do things in your culture, and I do not understand your culture, I will try and do things my way. So it's important that we understand people's cultures so that we are able to communicate effectively. Then there's the language barrier. Uh, Language is the most important way of communicating. So when there's a language barrier, then it means communication will not take place. Okay, it will limit the effective communication. So language is commonly, it's a tool that is commonly used for communication. In a workplace, for example, people have different linguistic skills. People can speak different languages, or people can speak multiple languages. So those that are able to speak languages that others are able to understand, well and good. But language is a barrier. So in mind, you need to be considerate when you are communicating with other people. Okay, so people are made different, and others are proficient in a language, for example, in English, others are not. So when you are communicating with people, you need to know to say this person will be able to understand effectively if I communicate with them in this language. Okay, so you identify the language and you use the language that the person that you're communicating with understands. So even when you are communicating in the same language, it's important to note the terms that you use in that particular language. I will use English again as an example. Okay, here in Zambia, English is our official language. So the fact that people can speak English, the majority can speak English, doesn't mean that they will understand everything about English. So we need to know the terms to use when communicating. And when you know the terms, or even if it's the same language, it can also be a barrier, because if you use different terms, then that person will not be able to get the message that you are trying to put across. We have psychological barriers. The psychological state of the communicators can influence how the message is sent, received, and perceived. Why is the psychological state of the communicators important? Maybe you could try and answer this question in the chat box, or Zele can help. Why is it important to have a good psychological state? Or why is the psychological state a barrier? The psychological state of a person a barrier?
Okay. Well, in my opinion, I think if you are not prepared psychologically, for example, maybe if you are stressed, or if you're going through a traumatic experience, you might not be able to receive that information. You might be absent-minded. You won't really receive the message that somebody is trying to give you, because you've got that barrier. It's I think it's what Nathan was talking about. It's also it's a noise in the process of communication. So sometimes, even if if you're in an office setting, you go into your supervisor's office or your manager's office, they are stressed about a report that they're trying to submit. That's the wrong time to talk to them about something maybe that you've been wanting to, because they're distracted with whatever it is that they're trying to do. So I think that's how that barrier can be thought of.
Okay, thank you, Zele. Thank you for that answer. So yes, Zele's answer is very much correct. And also we can add on to maybe anger, being angry. It's also another barrier and psychological barrier. When you're angry, you say things that you don't mean. You might maybe even not understand what the other person is talking about. So it's important that you keep your state of mind clear, even when you are having problems. Maybe sometimes, we're human beings. It's inevitable to experience some of these things that we do experience, but it's important to keep a clear mind so that even as we meet or interact with people, we are able to communicate with them effectively. So psychological barriers are there and they hinder the effective communication process. We also look at the we can also look at the self-esteem of a person. A lot of people have got low self-esteem, and that also hinders them from communicating effectively. They feel they're not worth certain things. For example, if a person who has low self-esteem in a company, for example, they work hard, they do everything, they do a good job, but they cannot have the courage maybe to go to their manager or their supervisor to ask for a raise or to ask for a promotion because they feel they are not worth it. So that is having low self-esteem, and that is also a hindrance to effective communication because they cannot express themselves, they cannot say what they feel or what they want, they cannot inform, they are shy. Okay, so I hope I am communicating on the barriers. If there are any questions so far, please feel free to indicate in the chat box.
Yes, there are some questions, Martha.
Okay.
Question from Emmanuel. Emmanuel is asking, language as a barrier, for example, if I'm communicating to someone who doesn't understand the language I'm using, how can you overcome that barrier if you're speaking two different languages? How do you overcome that?
Okay, thank you, Emmanuel, for that question. I think language as a barrier, you need to make sure that the person that you're communicating with is able to understand that language. Or if they're not able to understand that language, find means and ways of making that person understand your message. Because if they do not understand that language, then communication will definitely not take place unless you use other means or non-verbal, as my colleague Zele will explain. We have verbal and non-verbal ways of communicating. So you might employ other means of communication if language has proven to be a major barrier in your communication process. Maybe Zele, you have something to add on this one?
Yeah, I think just to add on, Martha, what you've said is definitely correct. If you are in a situation where you speak two completely different languages, then you need to maybe engage in some sign language. I think sign language, it means the same in almost every language, which is why even, for example, on our phones, our emojis is the same, the smiley faces, the thumbs up, and so on. So if you find yourself in that situation, then try to use sign language and you will make a little bit of progress. I think that's something that you can do, but we'll look at non-verbal cues in more detail tomorrow. And also, Nathan has made a very good suggestion. You can also use interpreters if you are able to. You can employ interpreters to communicate what each person is saying. There is also another question. Wesley is asking, is being nervous or shy considered a psychological barrier?
Yes, Wesley. Being shy is a psychological barrier because when you are shy, you will not have the courage to talk. You will not have the courage to communicate with others effectively. And being nervous also because your nerves are all over and you can't talk. You're just there mumbling, and so I don't think you'll be able to put across your message effectively if you're nervous.
Yeah, but I think also it can be a barrier that can be overcome. Shyness, nervousness,
Yes.
that can be a barrier that can be overcome. And we're going to share some tips with you tomorrow about how you can overcome those barriers if that's something that is holding you back. Finally, on this section, there's another comment from Nathan. Who is saying also on cultural difference, there are cultural barriers within the same culture. For example, a younger person cannot speak among elders in the same culture.
Thank you, Nathan, for that contribution.
Yeah, that's just a comment from Nathan. Thanks for that, Nathan. That's a very good observation. Thanks, Martha. You can proceed.
Okay, thank you. We move on to the process of communication. So now the communication process involves multiple parts and stages, each of which offers potential barriers to successful communication. So the communication process refers to the passage or transmission of information or message from the sender through a selected channel to the receiver, overcoming the barriers involved. So now you need to take note of the different stages that are there. And what you need to understand is that at each stage, it might not be at each stage, but it could be on multiple stages, the barriers do exist. So at each stage or multiple or just one stage, there you encounter a barrier to effective communication. So it begins with the sender and ends with the sender. Okay, and that's why the process of communication is referred to as being cyclic. So it begins with the sender and ends with the sender, and you need to understand that at every stage or one or two or three stages in the process of communication, you will encounter barriers. So that's why we keep emphasizing that it's important that you have effective communication skills. So if you have those skills, then you identify those barriers that are there in the stages or in the process of communication, and you'll be able to overcome the barriers. So the figure below is just an illustration on how the process of communication is. We have the message, the sender sends the message, then there's encode, the channel, decode, recipients, and then it all goes back. The recipient now starts the cycle again by sending the feedback, decode, then there's a channel. So like I mentioned, the barriers are there. Then we have decode and back to the sender again, meaning that the sender would have received the feedback that they are expecting. So here the barriers are on the channel of communication. So you might experience the barriers on the channel, or maybe when encoding, or maybe when decoding, or even when sending, maybe you might experience the barriers to communication. So it's important that you take note of these barriers. So let's look at these stages in detail. The source or the sender, there it's supposed to be source or sender, not source or source. So the source or the sender, it's the person that sends the message. Okay, the source of the message is the sender. So in order to be a good sender, you need to be clear about the message you are sending. You must know why the communication is necessary and what result is needed. You don't just wake up and not know what you want. So it means there's something that you want. When you are sending a message, there's something that you're either inquiring or you're informing. Okay, like we discussed earlier on why communication is important and why having communication skills are important. So you don't send a message without knowing what you want. So you need to be clear about the message you're sending. So you must know why you're communicating with the other person, or you must know why you're communicating with your audience. Then we have the message. So this is simply the information you want to communicate. When you don't have a message, then what are you communicating? Because either be it verbal or non-verbal, there's always a message that is there. There's always a message that you're trying to put across. So the message is very important in the stages or the process of communication. Then we have the encoding. So encoding is the process of taking your message and transferring it into the proper format for sharing it with your audience. It requires knowing your audience and ensuring that your message provides all the information they need. So encoding simply means you need to take into consideration the people that you are communicating with. Okay, you look at what type of audience am I communicating with, or what type of a person am I communicating with? How are they going to understand this message? What language will I use to communicate with this person? So in short, you take into consideration the context, okay? So that is encoding. So you need to make sure that the message you're sending will be properly understood by the person who is receiving that message. And if you make sure that the message is encoded well, then you have a proper feedback. So it requires knowing your audience and ensuring that your message provides all the information that they need. You have to know who your audience is. You have to understand what they know in order to send a complete message. So use the language, like I mentioned, use the language that they will understand, or use the channel of communication that they will be able to easily access. Okay, for example, when you are encoding, or maybe you want to try and send a message to, I will use this example again. You want to try and send a message to your grandmother in the village. If you use maybe you use okay, there are some grandmothers who are able to understand English or read and write, but I'll just pick an example of a typical grandmother, maybe who can't understand English or read or write. Then you decide to send a message using an email, and you send a message in English. Do you think your grandmother will be able to understand your message? I don't think so. So when you are encoding, make sure you put the message in a format that your audience will be able to receive it and will be able to interpret it and send you the proper feedback that you need. Then we have the channel. So this is the method or methods used to carry your message. I already hinted on the channel where you make sure you use the proper method of sending that message. For example, Zele, I'll just pick on you now. For example, Zele, when you are sending or when you want to communicate with people in the village, what channel do you use? It's the same example that I used earlier on, but I just want to hear your views on this. What channel?
Well, I think now almost everybody has a mobile phone, or if it's in a village setting, at least one or two people are going to have a mobile phone. So for me, when I'm communicating with my family members who are in these far-flung places, I will either send them a message or simply call them. I won't use, communication like WhatsApp or email, because I don't know whether they have bundles. I don't know whether they've got enough network. There's all those barriers. So I will just send them a text message, or I'm going to call them.
Thank you, Zele. So I'm sure this is clear enough for you to understand that the channel that you use depends on the context also. You can't send an email, even if you send a message to somebody who is in the village, okay? Do they know how to read that message? If you maybe make a voice call, or you make a voice call and then you speak the language that they can't clearly get, do you think you will communicate with them? So it's important to identify the method that will carry your message across. You need to know the type of channel that you use, the people that are receiving your message, okay, and why you're sending that message. So the channel is very important. How you send your message or how you communicate with others is very important. So here also the aspect of context comes in. Then we have the decoding. Decoding is now where the message has reached the receiver, and the receiver is the one that is trying to decode the message. So it requires the receiver being able to read and understand, okay, the information that you're sharing. So if the person you're trying to communicate with seems to be lacking the skills to decode your message, you need to resend it differently or help them understand it by clarifying the information. What do we mean here? When you send a message to someone and they don't have the skills to understand that message, you as the sender of that message will need to help the person to understand the message so that they can be able to give you the feedback that you need. So now, what are the skills that are needed in order for one to decode a message? So the person needs to have the ability to read and understand if it's a written if it's a written message, or listen actively or ask clarifying questions when need arises, if it's maybe face-to-face communication or telephone communication. So these are the skills that you need in order to decode your message. Decoding is simply understanding the message and interpreting it accurately. So when that person who is receiving does not have these skills, you need to help them to decode the message. So if they don't know how to read, maybe just help them to read, or either resend that message in the means that they will be able to understand, and they'll be able to send you the proper feedback. So listening actively and asking clarifying questions. If you are the receiver of that message and you need clarity, it's important that you ask the sender of the message to clarify so that you're able to decode it effectively and send the proper feedback. Then we have the receiver, who is the person that receives the message, and you have the feedback. You give feedback to the person that has sent the message. Then we have the context. So this is a situation in which you're communicating. It involves the environment you're in and that in which your audience is in. So you need to take into account all those things. So it's the type of message, the audience that you're dealing with, where are they, what channel will I use to communicate with them, what language should I use, and so on and so forth. So your communication process will not be the same when you're communicating with your boss, okay? The way you talk to your boss, the way you send messages to your boss will be different from the way you talk to maybe your son at home or your friend at the club. It's different. So context is very important. It helps to determine the tone and the style of your communication. So it will help you to determine how you're going to communicate with the person that you want to communicate with. I've spoken too much. Any questions? Can we answer some questions? Any questions?
No questions at the moment. So
okay,
I'm going to assume that everybody's understanding you perfectly. Oh, actually, sorry, there's one question here from Masia, who is asking,
okay.
it's with regards to the barriers of communication. He's asking whether trust is a barrier to communication. So if you're, in a situation where you're being told something, you don't believe it, but then it turns out to be true, can trust be noted as a barrier of communication?
Okay, can I take it, or you take it?
Lack of trust. Okay, let me take this one and give you a chance to breathe.
Yes, thank you.
I think in any situation that lacks trust, you fail to communicate. So you can take this example of management. If there's a management team that the lower management doesn't trust, they're trying to pass each other information. If there's lack of trust, then the communication won't be effective. So I think even in our personal relationships, if you don't trust somebody, it's unlikely that you're going to receive their communication well. So yes, Masie, I think trust or lack of trust can also be a barrier to communication.
Thank you, Zele, for that. I hope, Masie, you've taken note of this. Okay, so our last stage in our training today is the methods of communication. So the standard methods of communication are speaking or writing by a sender, and listening or reading by the receiver. Most communication is oral, with one party speaking and others listening, like what is happening right now. So I'm using the oral way of communication, and also some other methods are being used just here. If you pay much attention, you notice that it's not only the oral communication that is happening. However, some forms of communication do not directly involve spoken or written language. So we have 3 methods there, but you need to take note that different occasions require different types of communication. You can't use one method for different occasions of communication. So for example, there's a point that I mentioned earlier on to say, I think it's on the context. You also need to take into consideration where you are, what occasion is it, how you're going to communicate. Let's say at a funeral, you use a different method of communication at a wedding or at a workshop, in the office. So you need to take into account all those issues to say you need to use different occasions, and you need to identify the different methods to use at those different occasions that you find yourself in. So all communication cannot be of the same type, and it cannot flow through the same means. It's all dependent on who sends the message and to whom and for what purpose. So you need to take note of all these points when you are communicating. Okay, look at your audience. Who am I dealing with? The way you communicate with people at the market is different from the way you communicate with people at the bank. So you need to identify the occasions and identify the appropriate methods to use when communicating with people. So now, what are these methods of communication? In our training, like in this session, actually, I have categorized them into 3, but we'll just discuss one because the other 2 will be discussed tomorrow in our second training. So we have the verbal communication, non-verbal communication, and also the visual communication. So my focus is on visual communication. So it is one of the most effective ways of passing information because the human mind processes things in images. Am I right? The majority of people respond quickly to visual images instead of text. So there's an example of social media. I'm sure most of us, if not all of us, have Facebook accounts. We have Facebook, and we see what usually happens when somebody, when there's a video or when there's a picture accompanied with a text, you will be able to get attracted to that picture. You want to see what is this picture talking about before you even read the text. Okay, so visual communication is the conveyance of ideas and information in forms that can be seen. It adds more meaning to the information being communicated, and then it helps to evoke emotions and provide stronger examples for your message. And as human beings, we are better at learning and remembering what we've seen than what we've read. Okay, so like I said, if you see a picture, it will stick on your mind and you'll be able to remember that than if you just read a text. Okay, so if there's a text accompanied with a picture, then your memory will process it and you'll be able to remember what you've seen and what you've read. Okay, so for example, there's a menu there that I attached to this lesson. When you go to a restaurant, I'm sure most of you have experienced a situation where a menu is brought to you, and then you just look at the picture and you point to say, okay, I want this food. So like the way that food, the drumsticks are there, they're nicely presented, and you're hungry, and instead of you just going through what has been written, you just look at the picture and you say, okay, I want this. So meaning it also helps to make quick decisions. Okay, because you'll be able to look at something and you'll be able to make a decision based on what you have seen. So visual communication is very, very important. However, when you are using visual communication, you need to take note that poorly designed visuals that are difficult to understand will hinder the communication process. You will not be able to communicate effectively. You use graphics that are not clear, you use charts that are not clear, you use pictures or videos that are not clear. People will not be able to understand the message that you are trying to put across. So you need to make sure that the visuals that you use are not distracting and are not hindering the understanding of the concepts that the visual is trying to clarify. So when you use the visual method of communication, make sure the pictures, the videos, the graphics, the charts are very clear and people will be able to understand. Taking into consideration the stages of communication, taking into consideration the barriers also. So if you do that, then you will be able to communicate effectively. Okay, so we've come to the end of our session. Any questions so far?
No questions from anybody.
Okay.
Yeah, no questions from anyone. I think this brings us to the end of our session today. Thank you everyone for joining us, for taking time out to join us. Tomorrow, we'll share the notes again in the morning, just like we did today. And then we meet back here at 6 o'clock, same as today, for our final Q&A session. Thanks so much, everyone. If there are no questions, I think we shall end here. Thanks, Martha. That presentation was very interesting. So
thank you.
I'm just waiting in case there's a question or anything, but yeah. Alian says, thank you, very insightful. Wezi, the lesson was communicated effectively, which is great. Okay, Kavinda, thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. Chiluba, thank you. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow, and I look forward to taking you through day 2 of our training. So thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.